with my Somebody pick this up for me, thank you.
I knocked it down, so. Thought I always pick it up.
It probably won't stay, but I had to put it there. I like that. USA 250. So anyway, I'm going to start out with a little background information on what caused all of this. This is the Sullivan-Clinton expedition against the Haudenosaunee, right? The Iroquois Indian. And it says on some of the markers, I found it funny, the one that's at the Newtown battlefield. You've been to the Newtown battlefield? You ever drive down 17, go to Corning, or that way you drive right through where the battlefield is actually, on the ground there by the river. It says against the 6 nations of the Iroquois Confederacy. It wasn't against all 6 nations, right? Because who, the Oneidas and the Tuscaroras sided with the Patriots, so it wasn't against them. It wasn't against technically the Mohawk land because that was farther east. So it's funny that it was against the 6 nations. They wanted to get everybody included in this, but technically it was against 2 of the 6 nations, the Seneca and the Cayuga, who were the main nations who lived in the Finger Lakes region, which is mainly where this took place. And for a good reason, but the reason was, we'll get to that. Okay. What caused this expedition? Because it was one major battle and a lot of skirmishes along the way, but this wasn't a full-scale battle campaign. There was an underlying reason for this, which a lot of things preceded this in the couple of years before 1779 that caused this to take place. So if we rewind back to spring of 1778, right here was Old Unadilla, right? Up the road, which way would it be? Towards Windsor, with Anaquaga, and then on the other side, where Afton is, there was a village on the other side between Afton and Nineveh called Cunahunta. These were 3 villages where the Mohawk had taken over from the Oneidas, kind of kicked them out, and they had their villages. Now, when you think of the Iroquois Indians during that time period, or what do you think of they lived in? Were they still living in longhouses at this point during the Revolutionary War? Most of them weren't. Most of them were living in houses that were like colonial, small 1-room, 2-story, 1-room houses with glass windows, hinged doors. They weren't letting they weren't going out and doing as much hunting anymore. They were doing more farming, and they actually had stockade pens for their animals. And the funny thing is, when they did these villages, especially the one in Onondaga there, modern day Windsor around Anaquaga there, they went down and they said, boy, these soldiers that torched that said, these houses are nicer than our own. Because when they assimilated, at first contact, they brought some good ideas from Europe. They brought some bad things too, right? What did they bring from Europe that was a bad thing? There were 2 right, disease was a big one. What else did the Europeans bring to the Indians? Alcohol, that was a big one too. That was a big downfall. Those 2 were a big downfall for a lot of the population of these indigenous peoples here in America. But they did get a lot of good ideas too. Oh, wow, we don't have to go off on these month-long parties where we go and hunt and get our game for the year. We can actually raise animals, keep them close by our homes. We have doors on our houses now with actual hinges and locks, glass windows so you can see out. Because if you ever saw a longhouse in real life, anybody ever been to a place that's called Ganondagan? It's up near it's up above the Finger Lakes near Canandaigua in that area. It's a full-size longhouse. And 200 people could live in this longhouse, but there was a door on each end, which is the primary sources of getting in and out. So there were no glass windows. There were no swinging doors. It was a flap and there was a guard and somebody watched to make sure nobody gets in, but it was mainly with bunk beds and this. For each family to have their own home. Now, if you go up to Cooperstown, back in the Fenimore Art Museum, they have an actual rebuilt structure that was an actual Seneca house. And it is like a 1.5-story home. You look in, and it's like Little House on the Prairie. Everybody lived in one room. They slept in the loft with the kids, but it was a glass windows, swinging doors, and all this. So the Iroquois people, the Haudenosaunee, when they came to the Revolutionary War, were getting very modernized, very, I don't want to say Americanized, but European style of farming. And they were still an agrarian society where they farmed. That was their main thing. And as we're going to find out up in the Finger Lakes area, they really excelled there. But what happened was in the spring of 78, these 3 places, they burned them. John Butler came and burned these And everything in the Revolutionary War was a retaliatory, or because you did this, we're gonna do that, especially here in New York State, especially against the frontier and the Indians. They did this, so we're gonna burn your villages. So they burned here, they burned Anaquaga, they burned at Cunahunta up there, and, well, Joseph Brant, of course, everybody knows who Joseph Brant is, he had his headquarters in Anaquaga, and he was perturbed that this happened. This was after the Battle of Oriskany, and a lot of his men came back, and he was a little perturbed. Of course, the houses of these men are all gone. His family, his friends. Walter Butler, who was an American and a loyalist, was one of his. They worked together. They didn't get along all the time, but they worked together a lot in doing these raids and things. So, of course, this was in the early part of 78. So they decided, okay, you burn us, we burn you. And they decided not only we're going to burn you, we're going to attack you. So in July of 1778, down in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, before it was called that, the Wyoming Valley, this is where the Wyoming Valley Massacre took place. Anybody ever heard of that? You heard of that? Okay. You've been down to Wilkes-Barre and seen the sites, anybody? There's sites down there where it was 300 Patriot soldiers died during this one day. It was July 3rd of 78. 300. They call it the Massacre of Wyoming Valley because it really was. Hardly any of the natives and Walter Butler's men died during this. And then the big one, and they knew about this was going to happen, but they didn't take advice. There was a guy called Saucy Nicholas Sharp. He was kind of a went and go between the both sides. He had a lot of information about the Indians, what they were doing, and he overheard at a meeting that the Onondagas had in the Oneida, or not the Oneida, Onondagas, the Seneca, the Mohawk, and the Cayugas. We're going to raid the small community of Cherry Valley. And they told it was going to happen in the late fall, early winter time. Well, he went and he told the commander of Fort Alden, who was Ichabod Alden, this was going to happen. But he heard, no, nobody attacks in the winter. Why are they going to? So he totally dismissed it, and all his men, all the civilians who were in the fort for all summer had gone to the different homes around Cherry Valley. Alden himself and his men were at the Wells home. And that's where the attack started. But they didn't listen to Nicholas Sharp. They decided they're not going to. So you know about the Cherry Valley Massacre. That was the same as the Wyoming. They killed. It wasn't that many people, but because it was all women and children that were there and a few men as soldiers, it was really blown up. 30 women and children were killed, but 70 didn't get killed. So, well, this infuriated the commander of the Continental Army, which was who? George Washington. Doing my best impression. And you know what? He didn't wear a powdered wig. He actually had naturally light brown curly hair. So he just powdered it to make it look like a powdered wig, and he had the ponytail. But he did not wear a powdered wig, or a wig of any. He didn't need to. If you see some of the pictures of it earlier in like the French and Indian War, his hair was really... So, George Washington didn't like this. You're attacking our people. Yeah.
I think he wanted to be a soldier instead of a politician.
He was a great soldier. In the French and Indian War, you know, he had 4 holes in his jacket, or his vest, but none in his body. He got somehow 4 holes, and he survived and never, you know, and when Braddock got killed, who took over? Washington took over. You know, this young guy, a surveyor, you know, 20 years before the Revolutionary War, and you know, he wanted to lead men, he wanted to be a soldier. They wanted to make him king. The Newburgh Conspiracy, we want to put you up as a king, we want to make you, he didn't want to have anything to do with that. He squelched that. You know, so good or bad, and George Washington's got a horrible name because of what happened here. We're going to talk about the Sullivan-Clinton expedition. John Sullivan has gotten a rotten name. I'm not here to defend either one for what they did. This is war, but to tell the facts of what we know happened and why it happened. So Washington finally had it, and he decided, what's the best way to keep an army from fighting? Take away their food supply. And he knew that the Cayuga and the Senecas were providing the British Army with tons of food. Now, you've all been to the Finger Lakes somewhere, probably, up in the Finger Lakes Valley. You've been to Geneva. You go through that region. What's that known for today? Vineyards, lots of wine. I mean, the agriculture there is amazing. Now, at that point, believe it or not, when the British came through there, and I'll get to this, but I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. When they came through to burn these villages, they had never seen these Concord grapes before. And they were amazed how big they were. And just huge acres of these vines with these grapes, wild. And the peach orchard, and the apple orchard, and the cucumbers, and the melons. See, it's more than just the three sisters now. They had the corns, the beans, and the squash, which all worked in unison to grow and to nitrate the ground and they could eat. But now they have all these other vegetables, and they were plentiful. At one point, the Seneca Nation had the biggest cornfields in America at one time, which America wasn't that big at the time, but just think of that, acres and acres. My dad used to live in Missouri, and he'd say, these fields are huge. He said, you could see the tractor go out and start plowing, and in an hour, you would see him come back. That's how long it would take to do what? 2 furrows. You know, these fields are just so big. So imagine up in Seneca, in that area, Seneca Lake. So he said, okay, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to burn their fields, burn their crops, burn their homes. Whatever we can get, we're going to take care of. So he set up actually 3 guys. Now it's known as the Sullivan-Clinton expedition, but there was a 3rd guy who was supposed to come up from Pennsylvania, Fort Pitt. And he finally did make it up, but by the time he got there, it was late in September, and basically everything had been done. They were coming back from the expedition. But Cambridge, New York is known for what? Every Memorial Day weekend. General Clinton Canoe Regatta, right? Well, why do they start up in Cooperstown and 70 miles down to Bainbridge? Well, that's not the starting point of this expedition. It's kind of the official starting point. Actually, it started in Schenectady with Clinton, was up at Schenectady, came to Canajoharie, camped there, and then he came to Otsego Lake, the south end of Otsego Lake, which is where the Susquehanna River begins. And what they do to the Otsego Lake? Dammed it up, and they dammed it up for quite a while, for like a month or more. And while they were waiting, they were building these flat-bottom boats, bateaus, with their supplies and their men. I read somewhere, and I don't know how factual it is, I think I talked about this before, that when they flooded Otsego Lake, there's a lot of water. But the next lake over where Richfield Springs is Canandaigua Lake. They said that these 2 lakes combined for a time, there was so much water backed up that it couldn't flow out of the river. Now, I don't know how they built this dam, how high it was. I was just up there last week and I took pictures, and I'm trying to imagine how, because the inlet to the, where the Susquehanna starts, very narrow, like 30 feet across.
Yeah, it's a gorge.
How did they build the dam there? I wonder how they did this, how the water didn't get around. Now, maybe the topography wasn't the same as it is today, where you go down to the Council Rock Park there and it's low, but it's just amazing. And they say that water backed up so far that the two lakes became one for a short time. Well, Sullivan started down in Easton, Pennsylvania, John Sullivan. Now, John Sullivan, where do you think he was from? Or what ethnic country? Ireland, Irish. His father was directly from Ireland. Came over to New Hampshire and had 12 children. John Sullivan was the 3rd oldest. Now, John Sullivan's an interesting character because you don't hear much about him other than from this. But he was in every major battle engagement prior to this in the Revolutionary War. He was at the Siege of Boston. He was at Germantown. He was at Lexington and Concord. Actually, he was taken captive by Hessians, surrounded by him, and he had his gun, and he was going to fight them all off. And they took him prisoner. And later on, he was exchanged. John Adams said, I wish they'd have shot him instead of exchanging him. They did not like him. He was one of the junior brigadier generals. He was actually the last one. There were 3 major generals and 12 brigadiers. He was one of the last ones, but he was at everything. And it's funny, when he was picked to do this, Washington had other guys in mind. First of all, he had Philip Schuyler wanted to lead this expedition. Philip Schuyler didn't want to do it. Then he had Charles Lee, Horatio Gates. Well, Horatio Gates, remember him from the battles of Saratoga. No, I can't. My health, I can't do it. Nobody wanted to do this. So finally, 5th choice gets down to Johnny. Hey, General Sullivan, I got a plan. I got a job for you, and you're my first choice. All right, I'm up for it. Okay, and this is what he did. So he started in Easton, PA, came up to Athens, Pennsylvania, and built a fort there, Fort Sullivan. Anybody ever been to there? Athens, Pennsylvania. It's not that far across the border from 17 goes on, and you actually dip into Pennsylvania for a short time, but it's just a little bit down there. Actually, there's markers there showing where the fort was, and they were to prepare there while Clinton was preparing up in modern-day Cooperstown, ready for the rendezvous. And they were going to rendezvous in Tioga, New York, Tioga. You've heard of that. And when the time came for Clinton's part, what'd they do? Blew up the dam, cannoned it, and an amazing rush of water. And I don't know how they didn't drown or get dumped out of their boats or anything like that. I'm sure some did, but this water rushed them down. I don't know how far they got. I don't know. But they said it rushed down so fast that some of the Indian villages in that area were like, "Oh, mackerel, it's starting to flood here. Where? It hasn't rained in weeks. This is August." So that kind of gave him a little bit of a scare. And then they finally met up. Sullivan started coming up. And as they're going down to Susquehanna, and you see markers all over the place, right? I don't remember exactly where they start, but there's one in Cherry Valley from going to Cooperstown. Then there's Oneonta has a couple. Then you go down Route 7, there's one in Otsego. Unadilla has one. And then in the back of the Unadilla one talks about the meeting place where they used to meet, the Indians met, and where they met the colonists. Like General Herkimer would come and meet Joseph Brant quite often here. Right, Mike?
Yes.
We know kind of where that was over on the river here on Cartwright?
Well, there's speculation within the Cartwright Willow Street area.
Where that bend in the river is, and they've just been flooded because of, and there's been eroded and things, but it's kind of in that area where they would have met.
Yes.
Herkimer's men would stay back, Jim Brant's men would stay, and they'd send guys down, and they're ready to shoot if anything happened, though. And they were good friends, Brant and Herkimer, but they were still wary, but they met there. Okay, then you continue down. Bainbridge has one on 7, Afton, continue. And as they're going, they're burning these villages. They're starting out to burn the villages. And when they get to a place called Owego, right? You've heard of Owega at the time. They burned that. Now they're getting closer. Now we're getting closer to far left board there has Newtown Battlefield, just this side of this west of Elmira. It was called Newtown at that point. But as they're going, they're burning these villages. Well, Joseph Brant knows they're coming. Joseph Brant, Walter Butler, and his men know that now this army's joined together and they're coming. So they try and put up a fight here. Now, Brant had his headquarters on a little island out in the Chemung River, and as they're getting closer, they plan they're going to ambush them. So they put up breastworks. But the Seneca had a habit, and this is how they did their war. What color do you associate with the Seneca Indians?
Red.
Bright red. That was their way to scare. Remember you saw me there at the Cherry Valley when you.
Scalping Morton that night.
Yeah, where is he today? So one of the Senecas up in a tree. I can't see you, so you can't see me, type thing, or like hiding under the covers, but. Oh, look at that. There's a red guy up in the tree. Okay, the Seneca are here. So that alerted Sullivan and Clinton's army that the Mohawk Seneca, the British, are going to put up some sort of resistance here. And they did a small time. The battle lasted about 7 hours. Not a lot of people involved, but it was up. Like I say, if you go down 17, you see where it says entering the Newtown battlefield. Then you go off, and you go up on the hill where the park is, but that's technically not where the major battle was. That was kind of where they turned and went up and started heading north, and that was kind of the final fringes of it, and it was a mess up there. You imagine the woods are bad now. That was a tangled mess. When they came up there, they tried to make a triangle shape to box them in, the British, and like I say, they had somebody watching, so was nothing. They beat them and pushed them back farther. So now they're heading up north from there, going to the south end of Cayuga Lake. Whitney, Watkins Glen. I got the Glen in there. Yeah, Watkins Glen right there at the bottom. And then they start up the east side of, I think that's Cayuga Lake. Maybe Seneca Lake. Seneca Lake, right? Cayuga's farther.
Because the boat is called
Seneca? Yeah, okay, good. We'll go with that. Go up. Hector's up that way. And then when you get to the top, there's Geneva, which Geneva was a huge village. It was the largest village storehouse for the Iroquois during that time in that area. But as they get a little north of Watkins Glen, they come to a place called Montour Falls, Catherine's town. Queen Catherine Montour. That's where Montour Falls gets its name. Now, Queen Catherine had a sister named Esther. And where do you think Esther lived? Down in Wyoming Valley, right down there in Wilkes-Barre, in that area now. So she was part of the Wilkes-Barre, the Wyoming Valley Massacre. There's this thing called the Bloody Rock down there in Wyoming Valley where they got it covered with metal with holes in it, you can see. Where legend has it that they took a bunch of prisoners and 12 of them were told to put their heads down on this rock, and she went by with her tomahawk and cracked their skulls on this rock. Now that's what it says. Some people say, no, that's not what happened. Some people say that it wasn't her that did it, but that was Catherine Montour's sister, Esther. They were not Indians. They were not indigenous Haudenosaunee people, all these ladies, but they were big in the nation because they were adopted in. They were actually Palatine Germans. So Catherine's town, where they went to next, when Sullivan and Clinton got there, they burned everything, crops, houses, everything, but they kept one house. They left her house alone. Not only did they leave her house alone, they left her food enough to sustain her until they came back. And when they came back, now they gave her more food. So even though this was horrific, they were burning and killing and taking care of everything, and livestock, and there was a lot of compassion shown to this one woman. So they keep going north, and there's every village. So by the time this all gets done, I could go through into every village, but it's interesting because you go up the river without a paddle, you go up the lake, and you can see the lake, and these little villages. This was the village that was burned. This was the village that was burned, and you can see where like the grapes are, and there are apple orchards. But unbelievable how lush it is, and how much fruit is growing there now. Ultimately, they burned over 40 towns and villages, and the estimates that they burned were between 160,000 and 200,000 bushels of crops. So that's a lot of stuff, a lot of food. And this is the end of August, start of September. This is harvest season, so everything, this is it. There's no second coming here, no second planning here. When this is done, there's no more food, and that was the plan. Without food, you're not going to have any food to give the British Army. You're not going to have any food for yourselves. So they get up to Geneva. Now Walter Butler's Rangers, I've talked about him at other times. Butler was his father and his uncle and other men who were really savages. They were as bad as the Seneca. And he had a huge storehouse at the north end of Geneva. Canada-Saga was the name at the time. And now I asked a historian up there, and they said, well, technically now the lake is shorter than it was then. They filled in on the south end of the town. So she said technically the storehouse wasn't at the end of the lake now. It was 300 or 400 yards farther north, but they filled all that in at one point in the 19th century. So you can't actually go to the physical site. Well, you can, but you're just trying to figure out where it is. It's not where you think it would be at the end of the lake. Now there's a little welcome to New York Visitor Center there. But it was a huge storehouse. That, of course, boom, burned that. And they did keep some for themselves, of course. They had to go back. But ultimately, their main objective was not just to burn and then go back. Their main objective was to get to Fort Niagara, which is Niagara Falls, Buffalo, in that area. They wanted to make it to Fort Niagara with this whole expedition. But they realized as they were going up, and by the time they started crossing off, where they had resistance, they had different things happen, it was getting too late in the year. So they ultimately didn't make it to Fort Niagara. But they did make it to a place called Geneseo. Now, everybody heard of Geneseo? It's Geneseo, Geneseo. But the native name is Cheneseo with a CH. See, a lot of times when the American, the English Anglicanized thing, you think Cheneseo. Oh, it sounds like a G, so we'll call it Geneseo. Geneseo. Then there's a little town called Tylerville. You know what happened there? Bet you heard of it. Yeah, you heard of everything.
No, not really.
You will.
I'm here to learn.
This is great because, well, it's not great. It's a horrific thing to happen, but Sullivan had subordinate officers, right? And he wanted them to go out and scout here. Once they got up to the top, he wanted to see, hey, now every village we go to, they take off. And then we go to this village and we see in their houses, boy, there's still a pot of corn cooking on the stove. They just left within minutes, and it was purple corn. It wasn't like green corn, Green Giant. So this was corn that they made quick, and then they had to leave because they knew we were coming. So he said, okay, every village we go to, they're leaving, and they're coming and telling the next village. So they're giving warning. So he's like, they may be building up quite a little bit of, all these people heading up, because they didn't kill hardly any people on this. It was all burning and taking town, killing the livestock and the crops. So Sullivan says, okay, I'm going to have my two subordinate guys here, Parker and Boyd. Now I want you to take a few men with you to scout, right? Well, they thought, well, we they ended up taking about 35 men with them. So now you're gonna go out and scout, you're gonna sneak through the woods with 35 men. Oh, that's gonna work out great. So they get up toward, now this is Seneca country. Now remember, Seneca are the most savage of the 6 nations. So they're up there scouting, and lo and behold, they find what they're looking for, whether they want to or not. 3 Senecas come on horseback. Well, let's have a great idea. Let's shoot them all off their horses and we'll take care of them. Well, they shoot and miss 2 of them, get 1, but the other 2 take off. Now, they didn't go crying in the woods. What do you think they did?
Got home.
They went and told the Seneca, guess what? The white man's coming. Let's get ready. Well, Sullivan's safe down here, but Parker and Boyd said, we gotta go with these 35 men. So he kept going, and they had a Oneida scout with them. Han Yost. Real Indian name, I know. That was a Palatine German name, but he was a full-blooded Oneida. He was a scout for them. Parker and Boyd and Han Yost went farther ahead than the other men. And they get here, and all of a sudden, they realize they're in the woods and they're surrounded. So they wipe out the men, the 35 men, they kill them instantly. When Sullivan came and finally found the body, they were all over the place. But they kept Han Yost, Parker, and Boyd alive. And they brought him up to Little Beard. This is called Little Beard's town. He was, and actually, when we get down here, come and look at the Canandaigua Treaty here. There's a picture of an artist's rendition of who Little Beard was, what he looked like. And I'll show you here on pictures, a key here that shows who these people are. But Little Beard and Walter Butler wanted to talk to these guys. Hey, how many men are here? Where are you? What are you going to do next? And of course, they didn't tell anything. They weren't very cooperative. So they said, we're going to get some answers. And how is the best way to get answers? We're going to waterboard you. But this is a little bit more primitive. Now, anybody squeamish here? I won't go into great detail, but first thing they did was plucked out their fingernails. That's enough torture right there. Let me go on. I won't do every little detail, but ultimately what they did was, and I can tell you what it is and you'll know what they did. You go there today and there's a yellow and blue New York State historical marker. It's called the torture tree. And it's the same oak tree that was there 200 and some years ago, 250 years ago almost, and it's like this big around. At the time, it was a small sapling or a smaller tree. What they did was, they cut them open. Anybody know your anatomy? Your intestines, everything is linked together, and you're inside. It's not just your stomach sitting free. It's hooked to something else. So basically, they took the intestine and tied that to the tree, and they forced them to walk around this tree. While everything's it's not pretty, horrible. And then once they died, they cut their tongues out, they gouged their eyes, they cut off, and they put body parts here and here and put their head up here. So when the Sullivan and his gang came, what would you think? You're going through the woods, you're looking for your men, and there's a part of him, his head's up in a tree. Okay, forget it. We're not going any farther. This is going to be our fate. I mean, the other 30 guys were killed. They saw them. Okay, they slaughtered them up. They didn't realize they did this stuff. Wow. And a lot of this, and I'll fast forward to 1876, Battle of Little Bighorn. The Lakota Sioux against George Armstrong Custer and his men. And when they came to find the bodies years later, they found arrows stuck in places and this. Because the Native American belief was that if they desecrate the body, they will not be welcomed into the afterlife. So if you cut off parts and do this stuff, they weren't cannibals or anything like that. It was just, this is a way of, all right, you mess with us now, you're not even going to have a part in the afterlife because we're cutting parts off. So it was pretty graphic. So when they got there, they said, forget it. They never did make it to Fort Niagara. That, coupled with the fact that it was getting so late in the season, they would have never made it back to Pittston or Easton, Pennsylvania, down southern before winter fully set in. Winters in New York could start in October and things, so they wanted to get back. So they ultimately never made it up as far as they really wanted to go. So that's how that ended for them. But
Was Han Yost killed there?
he was. That was one of the first people they saw there, and that was what really terrified the men because they had a lot of Oneidas with them.
But wasn't he?
He was killed. Yeah.
Yeah, but wasn't he used
No. Oh, was he?
earlier to give false information to Walter Butler?
Han Yost?
Yeah. So something about the rebels were they was leaves on a tree or something to that effect.
Oh yeah, that's the same name, but it's a different guy.
Same name, different.
Thank you for telling me that. Yeah, I don't want you to be confused. Yes. During, yeah, Han Yost was like Han Yeri, Han Yost, he was Han Yost Herkimer. I should have given, that was the guy you're referring to back in Fort Stanwix.
Okay.
During the Saratoga came. That was another Han Yost. This is a different one, sorry. That guy there wasn't even an Indian. His name was Han Yost Herkimer. Why they called the Oneida Han Yost, I don't know. Whether he took that name because it sounded neat or he just liked him or something, but he was a full-blooded Oneida. The other guy was a white man, so same name but different person. But yeah,
Thanks, Ron.
sorry for asking that. No, thank you for asking because yeah, no, and he was a good scout in that area. He knew the area, but they did the same thing to him. Yeah, it was horrific. But the torture tree, you can go there and see that today in Cuylerville, New York. Canandaigua was in that area. Geneva, Honeoye Falls, or Honeoye. All these little villages were burned. And eventually the whole idea was to starve out the British, right? Now you got all these refugee 6 nations or 3 nations or however many nations, there might have been parts of Mohawk in there, but basically it was Seneca and Cayuga. Now you got all these people who are, wait a minute, winter's coming. This is 79. Remember the 77 to 78 was Valley Forge, and that was such a horrific winter. Well, the 2 winters after that, in 78 and 79, 79 to 80 were worse than the Valley Forge. Now, they didn't know this in August and September, but they knew winter's coming. We don't have any food supply, so what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go up to Fort Oswego or Fort Niagara, one of those two, and we're going to rely on the British to feed us instead of us feeding them. So a lot of people, a lot of natives died of starvation, just they died of exposure getting there. So a lot of them died, and the whole mission was to not kill off everybody. It was to stop from the British from getting, the food and sustenance that they needed, but it did kill off a lot. You'll read in accounts of George Washington saying, kill every man, woman, I'm paraphrasing, man, woman, and child, but if there's any left, hopefully, try and make peace with them. Some people call it a genocidal thing, tried to kill off a whole different, whole race of people. So, whether that was what it was or not, it didn't work. Because the Seneca have people I went to school, the full-blooded Seneca, Mayor Seneca Indian. His father grew up on the reservation in Salamanca, down in southern Pennsylvania, or southern New York, the Allegheny Reservation. The Oneidas, you go to Oneida, New York, right? They got Turning Stone Casino there. They got their other things there. They got museums. The Onondaga, right south of Syracuse, have a huge museum. They're getting a lot of land repatriated. The Mohawks certainly are still in the Schoharie Valley and up on the Mohawk River and Fonda and Norriesville and that area. So the 6 nations are not gone. And these aren't people that are, 34 or 5 generations ago, a Mohawk married a Chinese woman or American or something. And they're full-blooded Mohawk Indians down. They've married in their own nation all this time. So they're still here. So if it was a genocidal thing, it didn't work. And the funny thing is, George Washington was given a nickname. And I don't remember what it is. I can't say it anyway in the native language, in the Seneca and the Cayuga language. But in English, it means town destroyer. Which you could understand, right? He became president in 1789. He was called the town destroyer. Now, that wasn't a nickname for him. That was a title. So who's our president now? Come on, it's not.
At this moment?
At this moment, 48th president, right? Donald Trump. He is still called the town destroyer. Every president since Washington has been called town destroyer. That's their title, town destroyer. Even though, let's say, Rutherford B. Hayes didn't go through and burn the Seneca and Cayuga villages or anything, right? Not that we know of. I don't know if it's in his resume. What do you think, Mike? He is still referred to as town destroyer. Every president, Lincoln included, and Kennedy, all these town destroyer. That's their title. It's not a personal thing. It's not it's a little bit of that's your personality. It's the title given to the president of the United States of America. Because they look at it as, hey, Syracuse, New York, it's a big city, right? That's Onondaga's land. Syracuse has admitted that this is your land. There's pavement everywhere, there's skies. What are we going to do, though? You want it? Then they gotta, no, but we just want you to acknowledge that, yes, in fact, it is our land. It was stolen land. It is land that, when we signed a treaty to fight, the Canandaigua Treaty, which I'll get to here, kind of, promised them certain places to live, and it wasn't all their land. They had to be shrunk down from acres and acres till there are still reservations today. They're not technically called that out here, but they're places where the Oneida Indians live. The Allegheny Reservation, I guess it is a reservation. So they have certain places that they all live together, but they're not having their freedom of their full land that they had. And remember, during the war, when this happened, they wanted to remain neutral. All 6 nations wanted to leave us out of this. You guys came over here and settled, we were fine. Now you got big brother England wanting to fight you. You guys deal with this yourselves. 2 brothers, they didn't want to get in this brother battle. Except when it started coming through and affecting their crops, their land, and all this stuff. Then it's like, we got to make a decision. Who are we going to side with? And it has to do with the Fort Stanwix Treaty line, too, in 1768. The reason the Oneidas kind of decided to go with the Patriots is the way that that line was given. It took a lot of their land away. Everything east of that was for the colonists, and everything to the west of it was for the Indians. So they lost a lot of land that way, and they were a little bitter. They said, well, we're going to side with the Patriots, because William Johnson's the one that did that Fort Stanwix Treaty. That, and then all of a sudden they start coming across and taking our land and stuff. So who are we going to side with? I don't know. Who we have a better chance of getting our land from? If the British win, they've been good to us, or William Johnson's been good to us, we'll side with the British. So the Mohawk, Seneca, Cayuga, and Onondaga sided with the British. The Oneida, I don't know. I don't like the way he chopped up our land here. We're going to side with him. Now I say we as a nation. Not every person wanted to do that on any of the nations. Some Senecas, I'm sure, said, oh, I don't want to go with them. I want to go with the Patriots. They seem to be. But you went with your, like majority rule type thing. So that was the reason they got involved in the war to begin with. If you just stayed over and across the pond, it wouldn't have been a problem. But you had to come over, take our land. Now you're going to be called the town destroyer, your leader. So 1794, yes, 1794, Canandaigua, New York. It's one of the Finger Lakes. They had this treaty up there. That's in Cayuga, Seneca country, sorry. The Canandaigua Treaty. This is where they promised certain allotments of land. Like I say, they took a lot of land, and this is what you get for being peaceful with us. We'll give you a certain amount of land, we'll give you certain things. And one thing that they're going to give them that they still get to this very day, and I think I've talked about this before here, they get an allotment of cloth every year. Who mentioned cloth earlier here? What was it? They get an allotment of cloth, but it's worthless to them, they say, basically. It's about that big. And the Oneida lady who was, she runs the community center up there, the Mary C. Winder Community Center, which is the Oneida. We've gone through as a tour. They took us through and showed us everything. It's nice. It's huge. It's built like a longhouse. You go in and it's got like windows that look like eagle's wings. But it's a place for the kids to go to learn, to play lacrosse, to swim, to have a weight room. They have a cafeteria. They do all these events. She said, yeah, it's material. They give every person a piece of material, a cloth this big. But she said it's not useful for anything because it's real thick and crunchy like. She said basically what we use it for is to put on like a back of a picture or a photo frame. And she said now they don't even deliver it anymore. They used to deliver it by hand, a representative from the local politician or somebody would bring. Now it's just shipped UPS or FedEx and it comes in a box and then each nation gets it and they distribute it to all their members. She says they wanted to buy us out one year. The government says, can't we just pay you a flat rate and say, done with this? We'll give you a monetary. Now, the money would be more valuable than this to them. But they said, she says, we don't care if that little piece of material is the size of a postage stamp, which probably a postage stamp is worth more than material in here in a few years, right? Almost $1 now?
It is right now.
Postage stamp, unbelievable. She said, we don't care if each person gets a postage stamp size sent from the government every year, because we want this as a continual reminder that this is the only treaty that the United States government ever kept. And you think about all the nations that they made treaties with over the years out west and everything. This is it. The Cloth Treaty is the only one that's still kept today. And I guarantee 99% of politicians in Washington, D.C. don't even have a clue what it is. This is something that's done every year. They send them an allotment. And whether they give them money, I think, no, she said they do send them cloth, the actual cloth. So whatever cloth is cheapest, because at the original time it was a monetary value. It wasn't a certain amount of yards. That would have been all right if it was a certain amount of yardage per person, but it was a monetary value. Now in 1794, cloth wasn't as expensive, obviously, as it is now. So it keeps shrinking. She said, we want it as a reminder that whoever does this, to the U.S. government kept one of their treaties with the native peoples of this land. So, pretty neat. So there, that's the Sullivan-Clinton expedition in a nutshell. If you got a chance, go visit these places. Newtown Battlefield's the biggest one, of course. No time for questions tonight, sorry. Oh, okay, I do have, oh, okay, sir, yes.
I've always wondered now, when the expedition was done, and was the militia released to go home to work their farms? And did they build what was later called the Shenango Trail? And
Well,
read anything
the
about
Shenango
that?
Trail, I don't know about that.
Because I have read references to, the militia and soldiers.
Overall, I was
involved.
satisfied with the program. Agree or strongly agree?
Well,
Negative. Agree? or
Picked out the
strongly
land
agree?
that they liked.
Yeah,
Right.
He's good. He
That makes
knows
sense.
stuff.
And in 1784,
Strongly agree.
when
Yeah.
the land was purchased.
Yeah.
The presenter was knowledgeable
claims
about
that
the topic.
certain
Yes.
properties.
The program provided me with the opportunity to voice my opinion.
Yeah, because the war ended in 83, so they,
No, but he's asking. for
Did they
the-
release the
Yes, they-
militia? Do you-
I think at the end of the campaign, you mean? Before winter came?
Yes.
Probably.
Because they went back.
They had to go home and take care of their families.
Now the librarian wants
Yeah,
to know what
take
kind
care of their crops and
what
wherever
types
they
of
were.
programs we'd be interested
The militias were a little different than the
Right,
Continental
right,
Army, you know,
right.
too, so yeah, the militia was kinda like, we basically do what we want, and
Well,
we're not under your
age
command
50
so
and
much as
above
the Continental
programs.
Army
I'm
was.
sure the militia numbers were substantial.
Yeah, oh yeah, they were the bulk of, there was more of them than there were Continental soldiers, oh yeah.
Anything about
That was one of the big reasons.
What was
A lot of them didn't trust the government, they didn't want to be underneath
There's,
the, you know, you didn't have an organized government at this point, so.
Art and craft.
But yeah, they went back and did their,
Author.
took care of their families, especially with, like you say, with the fall, winter coming on.
Speaking.
I often wonder because some of the earliest purchasers of property just beyond the treaty line
Right,
were, militia.
yeah, that was payment for the services for the
Yes.
war, yeah,
Yes.
not every, but most soldiers got a parcel of land.
Yeah, most of them developing in the 1790s on that side of the Unadilla.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because years later, not years later, it was when they came back down, Sullivan and his men came back down, they came to a town. Well, these powered pack horses were worn out. So he did the humane thing, they shot them all and left them there. Well, they left them there for quite a few years, and the Seneca came back and said, what in the world are all these horses doing here dead? They were skeletons at this time. And they took all their heads and they stacked them up like in a fence or like a row. So then when they did get paid land, part of this land was up there in modern day horse heads. Spoiling it for you now. And they came and got their land, they came like, what in the world? Why are these skulls all lined up here? And they named the place of the horse heads, which is now the town of Horseheads. That's how the town got its name. And on the last picture over here, the last board I have on the far left side, it shows gives you a little description of the pack horses that were just, you know, humanely done away because the poor things just went from the 1st of August all the way to the end of September. That's a, you know, and they were just skin and bones, you know. So Horseheads is the name.
So you fast forward 80 years after this, and you got Sherman's March through Georgia all over again.
That's basically it. Yes, it is. Scorched dirt, burn everything.
As far as Washington's order to kill them, that's still just retribution for who they killed.
It was. That was a
They
lot.
killed us.
Yeah.
So-
Yep, that was a way of, hey, we're gonna dismantle the Southern Army Confederates, we're gonna burn all their food and make their life so much miserable. And if any of the slaves wanna come with us, we won't let them, we burn the bridges before they get across. That did happen, Sherman did that for quite a few days, it's like, you know, Sherman and Grant there, but
But they had to eat them.
yeah, they couldn't even feed their own men, there was you know, you get off on a little tangent there. Andersonville prison, in southern prison with the northern soldiers, they couldn't feed, they were starving the men to death. Well, they didn't have enough food for themselves, the guards, you know.
But then they had Elmira.
Elmira, right down there where the Finger Lake Valley was, an abundance of food, but why were the southern soldiers starving then? Food was taken to that camp, and this is, in the own words of the commander, it was refused as unfit for human consumption. But it was, that same wagon took that food over to the stores in Elmira and sold it to the civilians of Elmira. Good enough for them, but not for the, so this, you know, it's a tit for tat starvation thing all through the war. But yeah, same type of thing, that scorch, burn everything, kill the animals, burn the food.
Then you go fast forward another 80 years to World War II, and they do the same thing with scorched earth in Russia and Poland.
Yeah, yeah. Good way to get rid of the food. You can get rid of your enemy quick. Yeah. Yeah. Has it been 80 years yet? It's pretty close. Yeah. Okay, so do I get 100%? No. Okay. Any other questions? Hey, I kept it under an hour here. It's nice and cool in here.
It is, I can take a nap in here.
Oh, don't do that. Now, next time, I have schedules if anybody's interested. 2 months from now, I'll be doing a presentation in September. I'm not sure the date that's on there. It's about divided loyalty, consequences of loyalty. Being the person living in the Mohawk and Schoharie Valleys especially, how did you decide who you were going to side with? Just like the Iroquois Nation, how did Sonny had to decide, who are we going to go with here? And you had these people called loyalists, Tories, royalists, who sided with the British. Oh, now your neighbor's a patriot, and he's mad as heck at you, and they come and confiscate your house, your land, they kick you off your own property. Well, what if you're a patriot? What were your consequences for deciding to follow, freedom and the Declaration of Independence and all this? We don't want to be under the king anymore. So there were different things that people suffered on both sides because of what they decided, who they decided to align with. So that's in September. So if anybody wants to schedule for the rest of the year, I got some other places I'm going to be.
We'll take one.
Okay.
You got it, if you got one.
Okay. Now everybody smile. Sit down, Mike. Come on. We're running off so fast. You see this guy here? He's a troublemaker. He likes to run off. So, okay. I'm recording. I've recorded this whole thing, so if you don't want to be on video, too late. Thank you, folks.